Hello everyone, thank you so much for joining me today. So the plan is, as in the description, I want to go through kind of elements of schema therapy and how we can use it for personal development. So I've done some videos in the past on this subject, but today and in this live streams, I want to kind of approach it from a more practical perspective. So I'll do my best not to use as much kind of psychological jargon and terminology. So the plan is, for today, I just want to do this kind of introduction and methodologies and kind of what's the theory behind using schema therapy in general. And then in future videos, like over the past 5 videos approximately, I'm going to go through all the schemas basically. So how we can work with the schemas in terms of our personal development. So just a kind of small, short disclaimer, I'm not a therapist, so I don't provide any tips or techniques on treating mental health disorders or healing from mental health problems, but I kind of use elements of schema therapy in my coaching practice as a coach, as it helps me and helps my clients to put things into perspective basically. So how we can work with certain blockages. So as usual, I encourage you to participate in the discussion. There's a live chat on the site. You're welcome to ask questions, and I will do my best to answer all of them. But sometimes it's difficult for me to. Sometimes for me it's basically difficult to go all through all the chat because there's so many discussions going on at times. So it's best if you use my name or use the super chat feature. So just to get me started, basically, the reason I chose this subject is because I think very often when we go through kind of personal challenges or when we start thinking about personal growth, there might be some doubts in terms of what needs fixing, right? What is wrong with me? What should I improve? And what should I kind of let go and accept and let it be, right? So how can my client know basically what needs to be solved, what needs to be improved, what needs to be worked through, right? And I think kind of schema therapy provides this framework of organizing these different ideas, organizing basically our challenges into something that we can understand, something that we can work through. And the reason for that is because it kind of takes this perspective or kind of integrated and holistic perspective on our well-being. So it's not just, working on our beliefs or feelings or emotions, but also kind of it's more experiential. So how we experience life, how we go through life, what sort of way of life we have, personal way of life. So the very fundamentals of schema therapy, obviously, just as the name suggests, is working with our schemas. So schemas in a broad sense, they're not wrong. Basically, it's really good that we have schemas because they help us organize information very quickly. We can, interpret our experiences quickly in a way. So basically, with schemas, it's like we're having this little mental shortcuts, right? That we are in certain situations. For example, I know that today I'm doing a live stream, so I have to set up certain things. I get a little bit nervous. I try my best to get organized and relax basically. So I have the schema about doing live streams that I have to get organized. I have to relax to make sure that I remember everything, right? That provokes certain feelings, certain emotions, and I interpret the situation that on the beginning of the live stream I'll be a little bit nervous, but then as I go on, I tend to relax. So schemas in a broad sense, good that we do this. We go through life quickly, help us to interpret different situations. The problem is that with certain schemas, we jump to conclusions prematurely. So we interpret our experience through ancient and most likely inaccurate lenses, right? So, for example, I might interpret the situation, again, to use the same example of doing this live stream, as something horrifying. Like, I don't want to do that. Like, oh my gosh, like people are going to be watching me. That's going to provoke lots of anxiety for me, obviously. And then I don't want to do it anymore. So I can have the positive schema, like, okay, everything's going to be okay. This is what's happening. Or I can have these negative schemas that prevent me from expressing myself, or prevent me from doing things, prevent me from getting the best out of life mostly. So that's the kind of idea that when we have these challenges in life, when we feel like, okay, maybe we are not doing enough, or there could be things that we could do better in a general sense, or that maybe we're not expressing ourselves, maybe we're not living to the best of our potential. Very often it's because we have this schemas that prevent us from interpreting the situation as it is. So based on kind of objective data, objective things. And obviously I think the best we can do is to try to be as objective as we can, right? When you meet new people, when you get into new situations, obviously you want to have as best, as accurate perception and understanding of what's happening, right? Because if you don't, then people tend to get kind of lost in thoughts, lost in reacting based on kind of past negative experiences. And then very often our experiences, our plans go kind of sideways because we can't connect fully with the experience. And instead of interpreting things for how they are, we tend to interpret them based on how we used to interpret things in the past. And that kind of leads me to core reasons why we might have this negative schemas, or as they call it in schema therapy, maladaptive schemas. The reason they call it maladaptive is because they are preventing us from kind of fully functioning and being flexible and adapting to the reality and being kind of, functional adults, basically. So the general idea is, obviously, there could be many things. It's a whole bunch of spectrum of different things, whole different spectrums, basically, of different things. So, we can have some, on the one end of the spectrum, we might have, very strong kind of traumatic experiences and, abuse or being hurt or bullying, any kind of sort of negative imprints on our experiences. So we might have basically been in traumatic situations for ourselves, something that was too difficult to handle. But on the other end of the spectrum, for example, it could have been subtle things like, simple conditioning based on the kind of community or the society we grew up in, right? So it could be things like social beliefs or conditioning, kind of subtle conditioning of like, that was inappropriate to do, so you should have stopped doing that, right? Or you might have got bullied a little bit, and that left a little bit of imprint on your kind of mental health, mental well-being, but most importantly, the way you interpret things. So it's a spectrum. I'm not saying that everyone who has this kind of, maladaptive schema, so-called, they went through very traumatic experiences. It's all a spectrum. Right. It would be, just reading a chat, it would be wrong to assume that all of our past experiences is built on misinformation. Of course, there are good informations. That's what I was talking about on the beginning of the video, that not all our schemas are bad. And it's good that we have these schemas. We can interpret things quicker. We know what is happening. Talking specifically about these maladaptive schemas that can help us to understand a kind of blind spots, things that we might need to improve, things that our beliefs and our feelings and our interpretations that might prevent us from being functional adults, basically. And most importantly, prevent us from interpreting our experiences and what we observe around us and experiences of our people in not entirely accurate way. So So what happens basically with this maladaptive schemas is that, as I was saying, they come from usually childhood or adolescence, right? When we are very prone to learning, obviously, right? We're being like, sponges for different experiences, different learnings, right? Different kind of imprints from the environment. So fast forward to adulthood, right? There will be certain schemas already. So for example, we might have a very strong kind of imprint or very strong schema that there's something wrong with us. It's actually, by the way, called defectiveness schema, right? So when we have this maladaptive schema, basically we get triggered by the environment and we start to interpret that, okay, there's something wrong with us. We have an emotional reaction, right? And then that leads us towards a specific way of being. Whether that schema is true or not, rarely it is, but it's for us to determine. So basically we have to go through this process of analyzing all of our beliefs, analyzing our feelings and where they're coming from, right? But essentially what happens is we have the schemas that leads us to specific reaction we have to the schemas, right? So we can, for example, surrender to the schema, accept it, okay, there is something wrong with me, fundamentally wrong with me. I can avoid the schemas, the schema of defectiveness, to use the same example. And if I do avoid it, I'm going to avoid all the situations, all the possible triggers, all the possible situations that trigger the schemas. For the schema for me. So it could be social situation, it could be putting myself in challenging situations, it could be something like, trying to be successful or achieve my goals. Or the third possible option is to overcompensate for that schema. So again, using the same example, I think I'm going to have this defectiveness schema, and if I use the overcompensation, the way I react to this schema is to go completely opposite direction. So if it's defectiveness, then I'm going to be doing my best to appear as, very successful human being. I'm super intelligent, super competent. I can do things. I'm very successful, right? So it could be a little bit narcissistic in this case, but I'll leave it to you to judge it. So basically, with these three different reactions of surrendering, avoidance, or overcompensation to schemas, or to a schema, we kind of develop a way of being, right? The way we kind of go through life, because we rarely deal with just with one schema and one trigger or one situation that have this trigger, right? But we might have multiple things going on at the same time. So as you can see here with this framework, you can start actually breaking down your feelings, your behaviors, your mental models, your interpretations. So it's not, you're not looking entirely like one at your mind as one blob of everything, but you can start breaking things down. And I think that that's super valuable thing that the schema therapy can offer, because you can start organizing things, you can start planning, you can start basically breaking your development down into little steps. So it's not like doing everything at the same time. It's not like dealing with this kind of thing that is so big, right? But it's about breaking things a little bit down. So it's not being able to, Cappy asks, is not being able to point out the root of our maladaptive schema part of it? Yes and no. The reason why I say yes is because having a particular schema, let's say you have, let's keep using the same example because I don't want to introduce too many things at the same time. So let's say you have the defectiveness schema, right? just using exactly the same example as before. So having that schema could introduce lots of self-doubt, right? So you don't trust yourself. You think that you cannot find out the root of the schema, for example. So yes, having a particular schema could prevent us from, seeing the actual root. So I will be talking about the techniques later on, how to deal with schemas, but there is a way out of it. So there is a way out of all the schemas. So if you think about the schema as having a particular lens, right? You can kind of step out of this lens and you can broaden the picture. So that's your way out. And I'm going to talk about all these techniques for later on. So how do you know that you have a schema that needs changing? How do you know that your interpretation of your experience needs changing, right? Because again, I can present you with all the 18 schemas, right? And most likely you're gonna say, yeah, I have this, I have this, I have this, or I don't have any of them. So with schema therapy, well, basically the very foundation of working with schemas and the reason of why we need to work with the schemas. It's not just, the functioning or being able to adapt to the reality. That doesn't say anything yet, right? Of course, it's a goal. But underneath all that, it all comes down to our needs. So the idea is that we all have these basic emotional needs that haven't been properly met in childhood, hence the schemas. And now in adulthood, they cannot be entirely satisfied either, again, because of the schemas. So in childhood, maybe not entirely up to schemas, because again, you could be in very difficult, challenging circumstances, situation, abuse, getting hurt, or not getting enough attention, or kind of being neglected by your parents. Could be anything, right? So all these basic needs couldn't be satisfied, hence the development of the schema, at least to some extent. There are other factors too, like again, the environment, how you've been treated, how in your relationship with your parents. So because of not interpreting our experiences in the objective way or in as accurate way as we can, the idea is that we cannot fully meet our needs, because then we cannot connect with other people, we cannot fully express ourselves, we cannot have this kind of holistic experience of participating in life, in a sense. Again, to use the same example, defectiveness. If you constantly think that there's something, fundamentally wrong with you, you feel ashamed, you perhaps have anxiety, for example, you cannot meet fully your need for self-expression, for autonomy, for connection with other people out of this schema. And regardless how you're gonna react to this schema, even when you avoid the schema, right, you're still not putting yourself out there as much as you could. Even if you compensate for the schema, for defectiveness, and you try to be perfect, and you work hard, and you have this high standards for yourself, or you perhaps try to display this image of being successful, you're not fully meeting that need for self-expression either, because it's always there. The emotional response, it's the original kind of imprint, it's always there. So it kind of parallels a little bit this Maslow pyramid of needs. So with this theory with Maslow, we know the whole pyramid, we have to satisfy our physical needs, then we get into safety, need for belonging, esteem, and eventually self-actualization. So with Maslow, I think this is, and the whole humanistic psychology, it's very holistic, very kind of in a sense, it's like a big snapshot of yourself, of who you are as a person. With schema therapy, it solely focuses on this emotional needs. So need for connection, need for reciprocity. So give and take in relationships, a need for self-expression and performing well, being disciplined, being autonomous, right? Kind of this fully functioning adult, where you don't get dependent on other people, but it's more this kind of healthy interdependence, this give and take, this dance with people that help you to get something, but then you give something in return. So all these kind of basic needs for connection, autonomy, discipline, self-expression, right, and generally performing well are kind of, accordingly to this theory of schema therapy, are kind of the foundation of who we are and how we go through life. So once we satisfy these needs, then we can say like, okay, we are this whole person that we can adapt to different circumstances, to different situations, different struggles in life, different challenges. So I think that, in my opinion at least, the general idea is that all these needs are universal, so we all have them. However, I think in the expression of them, or the intensity, it's all subjective, so it all depends on us. So for example, let's say my need for connection might be different to someone else's. For me, it's enough to meet with people, like once a week, once every 2 weeks, maybe sometimes even once a month. But other people might need this connection with other people on a daily basis. And there is nothing wrong with that. There's no right or wrong way of approaching these needs. Like your need, that's yours, and it's going to be uniquely expressed. It's going to have this unique intensity with which you need to meet it, in a sense. So I think very, very often with schemas, the reason they developed is because we couldn't fully meet these needs in childhood. So we found this kind of maybe sometimes a little bit twisted ways of meeting these needs, or maybe sometimes not even meeting them at all. Denying these needs, I think it's very common with having certain maladaptive schemas where we say, okay, I don't need people, or I don't need success in life, or I'm comfortable where I am and I don't need to keep moving forward, for example, or I'm not capable, so I'm just going to give up. So I think all these little things fundamentally relate to our own basic emotional needs. And regardless, I think with kind of more positive outlook, I think regardless if we fully meet these needs or not, we are still on the path of growth and development. So it's not like, if we don't address all the schemas, if we don't do anything about our well-being and health, we're not going to grow. I think we are in this constant process of growth, regardless what we do or what we don't do. So something to think about, like, how do we meet our needs on a day-to-day basis? How do we take care of ourselves? What's the kind of relationship, our own relationship with who we are and what we need? Do we tend to, deny our needs, avoid them, surrender to them and kind of, oh my gosh, I don't know what to do, I really need something? Or maybe overcompensate them and be like, I don't need this, I need something different, something better. I think this kind of basic evaluation, I think, could be very helpful to start putting yourself in touch with your own needs. You guys are very quiet today. So basically, just to kind of quickly summarize, the whole pattern of working with schemas, regardless what schemas they are, even if they are maladaptive or useful, whatever they are, the way it simply works is, we start with a situation, a particular situation or an experience. We then interpret the situation in a particular way. We put our little lens, we perceive certain things that we want to perceive because they confirm our past knowledge, past experiences. That's a schema, basically. Then our interpretation leads us to a specific feeling or, emotional reaction. Then we react to our emotional reaction, and that combination of schema with a reaction to the schema, which is both on a cognitive and emotional level usually. Sometimes cognitive can be a little bit clouded if you have a very strong reaction. Both these components then lead us to this kind of temporary way of being. So I'm going to use again the same example just to kind of help you understand how it works, is that let's say I'm going to go to a restaurant or a bar and I'm going to hang out with some new people, right? That's a situation. It kind of reminds me unconsciously. I don't even analyze it. I don't even reflect on it. It's very automatic, very quick. That kind of situation reminds me how I didn't get along well with friends, for example, at school. I didn't have very good social skills, for example. That's a trigger for me, right? I recognize I'm in a new situation, I'm with new people. That's a trigger. Then that leads me to subconscious, again, very often, just automatic interpretation. Okay, very novel, dangerous situation. I might get rejected. These people don't like me probably. Maybe I'm weird. Maybe there's something wrong with me, right? That's a schema, defectiveness schema. Then that leads to maybe social anxiety. I don't know what to say. I don't know if there's something I could do to maybe get liked, right? I get kind of anxious. Maybe I get a little bit ashamed because I start comparing myself to other people, right? All of this, it happens usually with schemas. It happens in a split second. I broke down this process because that's the kind of sequence of how it works. And then what happens is I'm going to react to that emotional reaction and the schema I have by surrendering to it. Okay, there's something wrong with me. And then for the rest of the evening, I'm probably going to be very shy and I'm not going to be interacting with people. If I avoid this schema, I wouldn't go to that meeting to begin with, or I would just go home early because there's too many people, I can't deal with this. But the fact is that I can't really deal with my emotional response and my schema because my schema is telling me that there's something wrong with me. That's the second option. Or the third option, if I overcompensate for the defectiveness, then I'm going to be appearing okay, I'm this perfect superhuman, right? I'm very successful. I might go into this narcissistic extreme and be kind of bragging about my achievements and stuff like that. So you see here that the schema itself and the way we react to it, it composes this kind of temporary way of being, temporary mode of being, mode of behaving, mode of interacting with people. Once the situation is over, right, I'm gonna switch into my kind of regular self. Once the trigger is removed, was I kind of let the schema fade into the background. So generally that's the kind of framework to work with. So if you do identify in my future live streams, or if you want to do your own research, if you do identify any schemas in your life, maladaptive, I think there are some online tests as well that you can do. That's generally the framework on how to break down and understand your schemas. So to correct the lens, we have to reduce our reaction to the trigger of the schema. Yes, that would be the general idea. General, but there's something more to it. We need to basically reinterpret the whole situation. I'm going to get into it, actually, literally just now. So when we work with this framework, and I think this framework is applicable to anything that we want to change. It's a simple, it's most likely it's coming from CBT, right? So basically it's the composition of how we interpret things, how we react to things, why we behave the way we react and behave. So I think, if you write the template on a piece of paper, on a computer, for example, and fill in the blanks with different situations, that's going to help you understand yourself better. When it comes to maladaptive schema, I think the first step, someone is asking David D, how to identify a schema. As I said, there are some online tests that you can take, but I think in a general sense, to identify the schema, the first sign that you have a particular schema, or you're under the influence of the schema, maladaptive schema, is a strong emotional reaction. Essentially, I would even reduce it to a trauma response, trauma reaction. But again, it's a spectrum. But generally with schemas, what happens is there is strong emotional reaction. It could be anything. Or it could be the opposite end of spectrum, and you might, kind of dissociate or zone out or space out. And the reason for that is because, again, this kind of schemas, they're coming from childhood. And as children, we didn't really know how to regulate our emotions or feelings. It was all the way, right? It was very strong. We used to have very strong feelings, very strong emotions until we, started getting mature and all this kind of even out, and we learned how to handle emotions without getting into extremes. So I think in a general sense, kind of paying attention to when we react, when we're having these strong emotional reactions, could help us to start identifying potential situations that are triggering for us and potential schemas. But to be more sure about schemas, again, I recommend some online test if you can find. Probably if you type in Google free schema therapy test, that will help you to find one. Another option is to stick with me throughout this live streams. I'm going to be doing 5 more live streams on all of these 18 schemas that will help you to kind of understand different elements. Or another option is I could make a recommendation of a book. Just give me 1 second. So this book has been created by psychotherapists who actually created schema therapy. It's called Reinventing Your Life, the Breakthrough Program to End Negative Behavior and Feel Great Again. So it goes through all the schemas basically, and it also provides you with all the tips on how to work with each schema. So I think it's great. It definitely helped me. So once you kind of start paying attention to your feelings, to different situations, and especially if you kind of connected with what I was saying on your emotional needs, right? If you perhaps start looking at different situations and ask yourself, is it helpful to me? What I'm doing right now, how I'm reacting, how I'm behaving around other people, what I'm doing right now generally with my life or in this present moment, is it helpful to me? Is it beneficial? Or is it kind of preventing me from taking care of myself or taking care of my emotional needs? Is what I'm doing making me feel like, sad, depressed, anxious perhaps? Or simply maybe, even taking this compassionate approach towards yourself that, okay, I know that there are these emotional needs because Jana has been talking about it and I can read about it online as well, but I cannot feel them. Where are they? And it's okay not to know. It's okay to, it's a journey. It's taking one step at a time. You're learning about yourself throughout this journey. Essentially what personal development is. It's not to get quick solutions, move from the point A to the point B, but it's a kind of this journey of self-discovery and learning about yourself, right? So as you're going through there's different stages of, identifying triggering situations, identifying your needs, identifying your emotional responses, reactions, and how you cope with these reactions, how you cope with these feelings. All of this information matters in long term. That's how you learn about yourself. And I don't want to spoil the journey, but I don't think the journey really ends. I don't think there's an end destination when you fix all the maladaptive schemas and be like, okay, I'm done. I'm the best human being I can be. But you can definitely keep developing, keep expanding your self-awareness. And I think that's the fun part, especially when you start seeing results. So depending on how you kind of learn, depending on what works for you in terms of this process of self-reflection and looking at your feelings and looking at your emotions in different situations, I think for example, for me, what works is journaling, right? So writing things down, expressing myself through paper, right? But maybe you are this kind of person that likes just thinking, reflecting, or maybe talking to other people. And with working through this kind of subconscious, unconscious things, I think it's very helpful to have this supportive relationships. It doesn't have to be a therapist, but could be your really close friend that you trust, or your partner, right? And or even a stranger on the internet, if both of you, feel supportive towards each other and you feel supported. So depending on what way you prefer, as long as you keep working through this and keep exploring and keep looking for these blind spots of understanding yourself, I think you're on the right path. And the kind of key in this journey, I think, is to develop this maybe, or work on developing at least. I talked about it in previous live streams. I have some videos on it as well. Is to keep developing this kind of meta-awareness. So where you step out of the current framework, you look at yourself and interpret yourself and interpret your experience, and kind of take a few steps back and try to shift the perspective. What if I would think differently? What if I acted differently, right? Is it really true that there's something wrong with me, for example? Or is it really true that I get rejected by other people? So kind of, and engage yourself in this process of reflection. And again, there are many different tools and techniques. In terms of working specifically with, for example, methodology of schema therapy, what's super helpful is they call it flashcards. So basically, on a flashcard, you write that, okay, right now I'm feeling, let's say, anxious or ashamed, but I know that this is my schema that have been activated, my schema of defectiveness that have been activated. In reality, In reality, for example, there's nothing seriously wrong with me because I've been engaged in this personal growth, for example, or I've been improving, and here is the evidence of my strengths. This is what's happening. So the idea of the flashcard, and you can choose any format that works for you, but the key is to put on the flashcard that This is what's happening. This is how that schema feels. This is what experience is like. This is what you see. This is what you feel. Recognize that it is a schema, that it's not a totality of your experience, that it's not, a complete picture of what is happening, but that your schema has been activated. And from the broader perspective, maybe from this meta perspective, if you want, in reality, this is what's happening. There are some things that might be wrong with you, for example, in terms of defectiveness schema, but there are also all the strengths. There are also things that you've been working on already, and there are also defects that are not real. And I think that this is the biggest challenge, like in terms of defectiveness schema, kind of realizing that you don't have certain defects, that they are kind of imaginary or a result of bad experiences. Super powerful. But again, I will get into defectiveness schema in the future live stream. So generally, writing the idea, the whole point of writing these flashcards and kind of keeping them visible, keeping them, for example, in your desk, is that when you start having some emotional reaction or you had a bad experience, you pull out the flashcard, right, that you wrote before in a sober, clear, straightforward manner, and you see, okay, this is what's been happening. And what happens is that the more you do it, the more you kind of disentangle yourself from the schemas and you start seeing the broader picture. So again, it's a learning process. It's not like, you're going to listen to this live stream, you're going to read more about the schemas and that's it. It's not going to go away like this. It's a process of learning and kind of reconditioning yourself and basically kind of updating your knowledge on yourself, updating your perception, enhancing your awareness of what is happening. That is the whole point of having this flashcard. So you expand your awareness, you broaden your lens, so you don't focus just on one element of your experience. So generally, this is basically, in a broad sense, broadening this perspective and getting the bigger picture is the whole point of schema therapy, or even in personal growth. Again, it doesn't have to have this negative connotations that, okay, you have a maladaptive schema and there's something wrong with you. It's just one element of your personal growth or your personal journey of development that, might need a little bit of tweaking. But the whole goal is that, as you broaden your perspective, these maladaptive schemas eventually lose power. They will be still there, right? Because there's always possibility that, this might be happening or that might be happening. But as your perspective broadens, you see more things in your experience. You then interpret your kind of interpretation of your experience become broader. Like, it's not just about, okay, there might be something wrong with me, but you add to this interpretation that, okay, there might be something wrong with me, but also these are the things that I've done right, I'm successful at this, or I can do this and that, I have the skills. Whatever works for you. So you kind of broaden and loosen up all these little interpretations and beliefs that you have about yourself. And I think lastly, a super important element of working with this maladaptive schemas is working with your emotions and feelings. And I think that's going to be a tough part for many of us. So when we work with schemas, it's not just the cognitive element, the way we interpret things, but also the emotional element of the situation, of our interpretation, and of the whole kind of mode of being we currently are in that moment. So So how do we work through feelings and emotions? We might, logically, we might say like, okay, that doesn't make sense, or I know this is schema. But then on a fundamental emotional level, you might still feel like embarrassed or ashamed or anxious. So this emotional kind of healing and processing and working through all these emotions, very important in this process of changing your schemas too. So with emotional processing, I'm gonna give you some tips on how to work through these feelings as well. But let me just read some comments. Sedan Mieli, I'm not sure if I can pronounce your name. Can a relationship keep schema active? Kind of yes, but at the same time, you being in the relationship keep the schema active. It's not the relationship out there, but the very fact that, for example, you stay in a certain type of relationship that reinforces your schema, the very fact that you stay in it is you reinforcing that schema. So it's not like the relationship itself, but it's kind of you maybe interpreting things or, having this certain maladaptive schemas that keep the relationship going and make you, stay in that relationship. So usually as you work with schemas, let's say that it's a kind of extreme example, but let's say like you are in an abusive or toxic relationship, a person that doesn't respect you at all, right? So maybe you have this defectiveness schema. Because you stay in this relationship, the way you are treated without respect reinforces your schema. It confirms that, okay, there's something wrong with me, that person doesn't respect me, so that kind of confirms the schema. But as you start changing your schema, as you start working on the schema, you're going to start realizing that the relationship is not right for you, and then you will be able to leave. So that's just the one super extreme example, but that's what very often happens. Do the schema get updated after positive or negative experience? Yes. So again, it takes time, and that's why I said it takes time and learning with these flashcards and reminding yourself, because you essentially, you can kind of, it's a little bit like rewiring your brain. So if you repeat the same experience again and again and again, you're developing a new schema, basically. That's the whole idea. But with maladaptive schema, you even in adulthood, it might be super difficult to get as intense schema as the ones from childhood. And the reason for that is because, when you're a child, your brain is super plastic. So these experiences you have, they are super intensive on your brain. It's not just whatever experience, but it gets super intense, especially because it's repetitive, right? So that's why we learn easily. And then it stays with you. It's like an imprint on your brain. So as an adult, you need to kind of keep this reinforcement going of positive experiences. So you kind of overwrite the original schema with new information. So you update it. It could be negative experience too. And I kind of brought this example in the previous live stream on social anxiety, where I said, like, usually when we, for example, have this social anxiety, the reason we get stuck with social anxiety is because we keep punishing ourselves for having certain experiences, negative experiences, and that prevents us from getting more positive experiences, because we attribute this kind of negative interpretation of our experience. So with reframing, with kind of broadening your perception and interpretation of the situation, you update the schema with new information. Okay, so emotional processing. Again, working with emotions, part of the whole schema, because as I said before, the schema is not just a cognitive element. It's not just your interpretation, but it's also this emotional reaction that you get. And I think generally with feelings and emotions, you need to slow down. It's not going to be like with your beliefs that, okay, let's use some logic and be very rational and put everything on paper in an organized way. But emotions are kind of unpredictable and can be irrational, very irrational, in fact. So one part of emotional processing is to allow yourself to go through them. And then as you having some emotional reaction or an experience, pay attention to what sort of thoughts come to your mind, because this emotional reaction will influence how you interpret things as well. So it's not just the interpretation that comes first before the emotion, but it's a kind of a little bit like a feedback loop. So the most important thing is obviously to allow yourself to go through this different emotional states you might be having. Even if it's, the reaction you had to maybe a social situation or to a little failure in life, like maybe you had some challenging projects to do at work or at university. To work through the schemas, you need to kind of explore and be open and be kind of vulnerable to these emotions. And the reason for this is because with emotions, and one particular tool that I really like, that's been working for me, has been working for my clients as well, is when you're having this emotional reaction, pay attention where exactly this emotional reaction is coming from. Is it really coming from your current present moment experience of what is happening around you or what you've been doing? Or is it because you think unconsciously, because of the schema and your interpretation, that your present moment situation is exactly as the one in the past, and hence you have the emotional reaction? I think this one is the key, to kind of start paying attention and start attributing correctly where your emotions are coming from. Are they coming because of your accurate interpretation of your experience? Or are they coming because you think it's the past experience? Because there's some cues in your experience, in the situation, that resemble your past experience or your past situation from childhood. And if you do start finding that, okay, these are kind of feelings from the past, for example, I react because maybe I couldn't handle these feelings as a child. Maybe I didn't have an opportunity to process these feelings because my parents were not very emotionally expressive or available. So now as an adult, you have this opportunity to experience this, re-experience these feelings, re-experience these emotions, but with an adult brain and skills and resources that you didn't have as a child. So how cool is that? Like, basically you need to be kind of your own parent, at least for a while, when you're working with the schemas, where you work through these feelings and emotions, but with a kind of giving yourself space for a kind of child state, let's say, childish maybe emotions a little bit, or feelings that might at least feel that way. But then at the same time, have this adult side of yourself that is able to look at the situation rationally, logically, recognize that there's a schema playing out in your life, that there's more to this situation, that you can reshape your interpretation, that there's more to your interpretation than you originally thought. So as you broaden this, so it's a kind of, as you see here, it's a kind of dual mode of working. You work on your kind of, maybe, I call it adult because it's more rational. That's what the adult would appear to a child. But maybe for you it's reversed. Maybe it's the other way around. So you work on the one side on kind of improving your cognitive kind of interpretation of things and your experience, and you broaden your perspective. But then you also allow yourself to go through these emotions and attribute them correctly to where they're coming from. So let's say with the defectiveness schema, to use the same example, let's say I came back from a social meeting and I started beating myself up. There's something wrong with me, that went really bad. I'm weird in comparison to other people. And of course, I'm going to start feeling kind of ashamed and bad about myself, right? But as I'm exploring these feelings and emotions, and if I've been working on, the cognitive interpretations as well, okay, I recognize there's a schema playing out. I feel kind of ashamed about myself. There's something wrong with me. Is there a situation in my past, ideally from childhood or adolescence, that resembles this situation? And that's how you start linking this past and present, essentially. So you acknowledge your past, okay, you had these schemas and these experiences, but then you also acknowledge and give yourself to participate in a present moment experience as well. Emily asks, how do you deal with emotional reactions that the schema causes? So I literally just explained that. You start looking for where the feeling is actually coming from. So the thing is that I can't make any promises, but I can bet a lot of money that once you start broadening your interpretation, once you start recognizing where your reactions are really coming from, why you're reacting the way you're reacting, your emotional reactions are going to start subsiding, because you're giving yourself a chance to process these feelings, to go through these emotional experiences without, going into this coping strategies of avoidance, surrender, or overcompensation. You allow yourself to experience fully who you are in that moment or after the situation, because retrospection works as well. It doesn't have to be all in the present moment, but this simple retrospection of going through your past experiences from the past week, let's say, and kind of analyzing them and allowing yourself to feel, basically. I know it sounds maybe like a cliche, but kind of, allowing yourself to have these different emotional reactions and then attributing them to which beliefs they're coming from, which beliefs are triggering these emotional reactions, and whether your beliefs are actually accurate and coming from your solid present moment experience, from your, super objective life, or are they coming from your past experiences, or traumatic experiences? So again, flashbacks, emotional flashbacks, that would be another terminology for this. But again, as I was going to say, on the one side, it's all a spectrum. So on the one side, you could call it an emotional flashback, depending on how intense the experience is. But for those of you who, maybe are not having as strong emotional reactions, these are just kind of schema reactions, part of the schema of emotional experiences. So just to kind of quickly wrap up, the ways to work with your schemas is to understand the whole pattern. So there is a triggering situation, triggering experience that you have that leads you to interpretation of that experience, that leads you to emotional reaction to that experience, and that leads you to a coping strategy that you adopt to cope with that emotional reaction. And that creates at the end a kind of temporary way of being, temporary mode that you get into in order to process and work with the schema, or kind of, being in that experience of schema that very often comes from the past. So understanding this sequence, using this template, I think super helpful in identifying not just, this super heavy or intense maladaptive schemas, but also, simple blockages in your life that maybe could be stopping you from becoming more than you are, kind of developing and progressing and growing as a person. And the kind of other tools I mentioned to work with this framework, with this pattern and schemas as well, is something like journaling or having supportive relationships. Someone who can point out your blind spots, basically. But you really need to trust that person, and that person needs to be really kind of, on the broader spectrum of development as well. And so journaling, supportive relationships, and also, most importantly, I think developing these flashcards. So with flashcards, you describe the exact experience of the schema that you can get into. So what is happening when your schema gets activated? What triggered that schema? What emotional reaction you had? What sort of beliefs are associated with that schema? So then each time you have a similar situation, have a similar reaction, you can look at this flashcard and say, okay, this is my schema playing out, basically. So these are the kind of foundations of working with all the schemas. And again, as I promised before, over the next 5 live streams, I will be going through all the schemas, basically. So each live stream will be focused on a different need, because the idea is that this therapist, the kind of creators of the schema therapy, they develop 5 different domains of our needs. They relate to our, autonomy, connection, self-expression. So each domain of these needs has particular schemas, and I'm going to go through all of them over the next 5 live streams. If you would like to kind of get a perspective on your schemas, perhaps, or work with this framework, I do offer individual coaching, and you can book your free consultation on my website. It's on the description underneath the video. And also, I think super important news is that if you do want to have a kind of a good start of the year, or maybe if you don't believe in the new year, I do also offer group coaching, and it's an amazing opportunity for learning, for broadening your perspective in a really friendly and like-minded community of individuals that can help you grow and learn more about yourself. And you can sign up for the program. Again, the link is underneath the video. It's in a comment section, actually. So the program starts on the beginning of January, on the 10th of January. And so far, I had really good results for the clients. You can read the testimonials on my website. So the program focuses on kind of developing your discipline skills, organizational skills, time management skills, and kind of getting things done, becoming more productive, getting into this state of flow and boosting your confidence. So all these different elements of kind of, starting the year now right, on the right footing, or basically just using this opportunity to maybe make some changes in your life. So before I go, I'm just gonna read out some comments. If there are any more questions. David asks, is there some work to do also with dream experiences, dreams interpretations? I personally don't really work with dreams, but I think maybe not the dreams, like what I find personally interesting, maybe not the dreams themselves, but how you interpret the dreams, right? And also what sort of people there are in a dream. So focus on kind of describing the characters. When you do start paying attention to your dreams, or you do a dream journal, pay attention to the characters in your dream, because they often represent different parts of your personality, if you want to get into that dream interpretation. Thank you so much, Mamu. When are my live streams? So I usually do them on Sundays at this time, 7 p.m. It's always Sunday, 7 p.m. UK time. I think it's 1 p.m. Central, or yeah, it is. I think it's 1 p.m. Central, if I remember right. And I usually do them either on a weekly basis or every 2 weeks. In this case, because it's the kind of festive season, I'm gonna do the next live stream in 2 weeks. Let me just double check. Yeah, it's gonna be, the next live stream is gonna be most likely in 2 weeks, so it's gonna be the 3rd of January. And again, I usually do it on weekly or every 2 weeks, depending on the time, because I'm also doing university, so I have to kind of juggle different things. Are you familiar with internal family systems? A little bit. And I think it's kind of similar, isn't it kind of, yeah, I think it's similar to like schema therapy, because then you deal with different parts of yourself, representing different, probably people in your life from the past, if I remember right. But I'm a little bit familiar, but I don't really work with that framework. Okay, so thank you so much for being with me today. I hope you found it valuable. If you have any more questions, I'm always available on YouTube, basically. If you want to leave your questions in the chat box underneath the video, and I will do reply whenever I can. And in the meantime, I do offer personal coaching. I'm a coaching psychologist. So basically, coaching is all about kind of growth and development, and this creative process of learning more about yourself and expanding your awareness. So if you're not sure whether it's right for you, I do offer free consultations. Or if you want to jump in straight into group coaching situation and learn with other people or from other people and engage in this thought-provoking private and confidential discussions, you can still sign up for my next group coaching program. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you next time. Hope you have a wonderful Christmas time and a happy new year. Take care.